So there are two readings. First is from the Old Testament, and it's from 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 to 13. Now, I'm not using the same Bible as you, so maybe, Dave, you could call out the page number? 360 in the Bibles here. So 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 to 13. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under a tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood in the mouth of the cave. Our New Testament reading is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, firstly verse 8 and then verse 16 to 18. And your page number is 1161. So 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 8. "We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair." Verse 16. "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Sean. I've had enough, Lord. I think the title is Every Preacher's Nightmare, Dave. I mean, what if we had a Pentecostal moment and somebody starts shouting it out in the middle of the service while the preacher's preaching? Yes. Imagine for a moment you're 14 years old and you are lying on top of a hilltop on a warm summer's evening. Late evening, it's dark. You're waiting for some friends to catch you up. And as you stare into the skies, you see pinpricks of light. And bit by bit, the glory of the heavens open up before you. Millions upon millions of stars. And that was me some 50 plus years ago on Clent Hills. I was with the Scouts and I gazed upon this spectacle and suddenly became aware of how small I was and how immense the universe was. And at that time, I became overwhelmed with a sense of somebody bigger, hugely bigger than me, who enveloped me in love. I felt safe. I felt secure. And it was a moment when I felt truly alive. And I'll never forget that moment, which for me, although I was unable to articulate it at the time, was my first heavenly encounter. And I wonder whether you've experienced, not necessarily that, but something, a moment, a revelation, a sense of God's presence. Could be a big, powerful earthquake-type moment or a quiet whisper, a small moment of revelation. Well, we read, didn't we, or Sean read in our first reading, about Elijah has had a pretty heavenly encounter. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed the prophets with a sword. Here's a guy who has just defeated 800 prophets of Baal. In previous chapters, he's raised a boy to life and been miraculously fed by ravens, yet he's sitting under a bush, having given up. I've had enough, he told the Lord. Take away my life. This is the Message version, I think. I've got to die sometime, and it might as well be now. And if we contrast that with our New Testament reading from Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, we see somebody else who's had a pretty amazing encounter. You think back, Paul's revelation on the road to Damascus of Jesus. And yet he's had a life that's not been easy. I don't know whether you've read this particular one in 2 Corinthians. I've been flogged 5 times with the Jews, 39 lashes, beaten by Roman rods 3 times, pummeled with rocks once. I've been shipwrecked 3 times, immersed in the open sea for a night and a day. Hard travelling, year in, year out. I've had to ford rivers, fend off robbers, struggle with friends, struggle with foes. I've been at risk in the city, at risk in the country, endangered by desert sun and sea storm, betrayed by those I thought my brothers. I've known drudgery and hard labour, many a long and lonely night without sleep, many a missed meal, blasted by the cold, naked to the weather. And that's not the half of it. And then he says this, and yet. I've heard sermons preached on those 2 words, and yet. He says, and this is the message, I love this. These hard times, he says, are small potatoes compared to the coming good times, the lavish celebration prepared for us all. So here we have 2 major biblical figures, each having experienced close encounters with a living God. And we have one, in a sense, wimping out under a bush, wanting to die, and the other comparing his troubles to small root vegetables. And which are you? Are you the hide under the bush type, or just seeing the world in that sort of small way? Or maybe like us all, I suspect, we gravitate, or we move between the 2 points, don't we? Depending so much on our particular circumstances. We know who we'd probably rather be like, and yet many of us, I think, have empathy with Elijah, saying on many occasions, "I've had enough, Lord." So what can we learn from this? Well, 3 things, I think. Firstly, God never gives up on us. In both Elijah and Paul's situation, God doesn't give up, does he? We read in 1 Kings that God sends an angel to bring Elijah nourishment and encouragement to do one last task, which is to pass on his anointing to Elisha. And Paul's conviction is driven, isn't it, like a sort of nuclear reactor within him by his earthquake revelation of Jesus on that road to Damascus. And he's renewed day by day by the Holy Spirit. And in both cases, God is reminding them in different ways through the work of the Trinity that though they may struggle and even give up, he never gives up on them. And all of us are going to feel on occasion despair and maybe a sense of abandonment. We want to give up. Our circumstances, they may be anxiety, illness, relationships, apparent lack of faith. We may be facing tough decisions, tough times, exhaustion. And you know, it's going to sound a cliche, but God often uses these times of darkness. When I was a baby Christian in my late 20s, I was fit, healthy, had a very active life. I was content in my job, had a great social life, happily married. We ran the church youth club, and in most regards, I reckon we were pretty contented. I didn't really want challenge, I didn't want pain, I didn't want grief. And we were talking to a friend, and he said to me something which I have never forgotten. And he said, "Barry, remember, your soul grows through adversity." Bang, a whole new way of looking at God at work in me. And not long afterwards, we had troubles. We struggled with infertility. The doctor told me he thought I might have a brain tumour. One of our youth group tried to commit suicide. And I didn't welcome any of these things. But when I reflect back, I can see that the struggles that we went through, the overwhelming nature at the time, made us humble, made us call upon God, made us rely upon him. Our souls grew. Our capacity to cope with the problems of this life were enlarged and expanded. And I was strengthened in the knowledge that God had never and did never leave or give up on me at that time or ever since. Second point is guilt. I think as Christians, we're pretty good at guilt, aren't we? We practice it, we refine it, we pile it upon ourselves. And the trouble is that creates often a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-love. And that, in a sense, fuels anxiety. And if you feel guilty, as often we do, we're in good company. I mean, Elijah was one, other biblical figures, and contemporary figures too. Mother Teresa is not somebody you would think felt guilt, but she did, for her lack of faith. She wrote this: "When I raise my eyes to heaven, there is such convicting emptiness that those thoughts return like sharp knives." Mother Teresa had doubts, had guilt. And I've been a Christian for most of my adult life, and whilst hilltop moments and overcoming struggles have given me a deep assurance of God's love, there are times when I haven't been happy, cheerful, optimistic, fun-filled, holy, spiritual, the person you see standing before you? Hard to believe, I know. Just ask Deb, she'll tell you otherwise. Yeah, and I think like most of you, I've been tired at times, emotional, physically ill, depressed, anxious, irritable. Prayers offered up sometimes seem to go into an empty void. And sometimes, I have to say, at times like that, a fun-filled, bouncy Christian leaping in with hugs and scriptures, pronouncing they've just spent 3 hours with the Lord, reading 32 chapters of Leviticus, raising the dead, and times like that, I feel, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel shriveled with a lack of zealous faith? And I want to sit under a bush, filled with guilt, and say, Lord, strike me down. Well, actually, strike him down first, but strike me down later. And then I come and I think, well, Jesus, you are not just fully divine, but you are human too. And you understand my frailty, my flakiness. And you know what? That guilt dissipates at that moment. And even though I'm going to wimp out occasionally, I take great comfort in knowing that Jesus is there with me. And that helps us, I think, to the third point, really, not lose heart. I was trying to think of an occasion when I lost heart, and I thought, one occasion. And it was when I was in the lifeboat crew, and we were out on practice. And I have to say, my life was more at danger when we were practicing than ever it was whenever we went on a proper rescue. Partly because we used to put ourselves in difficult situations. So we were out one morning practicing, and we thought it would be a good idea to try and practice landing the lifeboat right against the cliffs, on the rocks. Because if somebody's stuck on the cliffs, you've got to land the lifeboat right on it and rescue them. So a bit like that picture you got there. In we went, jammed the boat onto the cliffs. And at that point, the sea dropped away, and we were stranded on the rocks. Propeller couldn't work because there were rocks everywhere, and the waves started to crash onto us, filling the boat up. There's a crew of 3, and so we start to try and drag the boat out. But every time we try to drag it out, the waves would come in, knock us over, fill the boat up, and I thought, this is it. And I would just say, I may not be the biggest bloke. Here's a picture of me as a child. That's me on the left. You can see such powerful legs there. I think in a previous life I was probably related to a sparrow, but anyhow. We were unable to get out. Absolutely unable to pull away from those rocks. And it wasn't until the big guys, the other 2 guys, big beefy guys, wrenched the boat free that we were able to climb back in, get out. And I realised at the time that it wasn't my strength, actually, that got us out of that problem. It was strength from without. And I think most of us are or will face physical, emotional, or spiritual challenges in our lives. Not necessarily like that, but others. And I mentioned earlier Paul's physical challenges. And he says a very important thing in verse 8. He says, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, not in despair. I wonder actually how Paul manages that, because here's a man who is, in his words, wasting away. His body is wasting away, but inwardly he is being renewed day by day. As I say, I got out of the problem in the lifeboat by relying on my colleagues, big burly guys. And that's Paul's point in a sense. He has had his Damascus Road experience. He knows God is the Father of Jesus, the one by whose power Jesus had gone down to earth, died and been raised as Messiah into new life. And is it because of this that he has glimpsed, he's understood, he's realised, recognised something that causes him to write, as Tom Wright says, one of the most astonishing statements of Christianity ever written. He says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." And this is the sentence that Tom Wright fixes on. We fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Paul is not saying that our present lives don't matter. He's saying that we have to balance the things of the present world, to contrast them, as it were, with the things of the future world, of eternity. I was thinking, actually, just before I came out, of that hymn, is it immortal, invisible, God only wise? And the word that came to me was perspective. I think what Paul has got here is a perspective. For me, it came initially on the hills that time when I was 14 or so. And I realised, that our lives, in some ways, are like that. They come, they go. But God is there before, during, and after. He is there for eternity. And seeing our lives in that perspective helps us. And maybe for you, it's prayer and meditation that gets you there. Maybe it's the regular reading of the Bible. I know for Debs, it's worship music. For many of us, it's, as we will in a moment, take the blood of Jesus into our very own bodies in communion. I think, Jill, you say the glory of the unfolding seasons. You reach out for God in those moments. I know personally seeing the self-sacrifice of other Christians, particularly our mission partners, fills me with heart, with hope. And for many of us, and I know, Dave, you're sort of going through this at the moment, and you will have done as a vicar many times, notice the extraordinary change of perspective that occurs when friends or relatives are facing major health issues, maybe facing the end of their lives. And I've seen it on a number of occasions as they experience, as it were, the outward wasting away of their bodies, their inner spirits shine with remarkable grace and light. It's as though they've glimpsed something of the glory of what is to come. I think some translations say the weight of glory. And it's evidence of their being renewed by God day by day. Tom Wright says, again, it's as though I live in a tent today, but one day I will live in a palace. And our response must surely be that of gratitude and thankfulness that God, creator of everything we see, of those magnificent pictures of the universe I think you were showing last week, Joe, immense glories that we can't even see but can only imagine. Thankfulness to God that he so loved us that he sent Jesus to open the door that we may once again glimpse that weight of glory that awaits us, to fix our eyes on him, and to know that whatever happens in this life, we are assured of this glorious eternal inheritance. And so we finish, in a sense, where we started, on the hilltop, looking in awe and wonder at the majesty of God. And as we prepare to share in the bread of life, let's remember how Elijah's emotional strength was renewed by bread, and give thanks that God came to us as Jesus, so that we can today also share the very bread of life. And as we now lift our voices in praise, let's fix our eyes not on the troubles around us, but upon God, our refuge, our strength, our shelter. And as we sing now, let us come again to Jesus, the source of all creation, and drink from his well that never dries.